see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Ray Taylor, and thank you so much for joining me in this discussion, Ray.
Pleasure.
You had we had done a previous interview, and you contacted me, said that you just had taken a trip to Russia and had I guess done some workshops there around with compassionate communication and nonviolent communication, or also called NVC, and you were like very enthusiastic about that, and you just wanted to share some kind of experiences and thoughts about that. Do you want to tell me about what it is?
Sure. I am, you're right, excited about it. I think, and it was really to Moscow alone. So I'm talking about Moscow, which is like a kind of intense island within Russia, which is a really exciting place to be at the moment. They've had a revival of theater and cinema in Russian language. They've seen some Hollywood films and they like them, but they're ready for something else now. And so they're making their own, and also it's an incredibly high energy city. It's got the fastest walking speed of any city in the world, and I think it's held that position for like 3 decades now. So it's like everyone walks at my speed. It's wonderful. But we went there to do a nonviolent communication and embodied work. So that was, and both of them are approaches to empathic connection. The embodied work is kind of, you can be yin or you can be yang, and so you can. The Russians themselves told us that we expect to have a sort of a lecture or a show, and then maybe one exercise at the end. And that's not the way I'm used to doing things, and the embodied work you can't do that way. But we found that they actually loved going right into the sort of the physical, listening with their bodies, speaking with their bodies, and it worked really well. They learned really, highly intelligent, motivated, open to new ideas, very open to foreigners. In fact, it was an advantage. It was in some ways easier being foreigners. So it was great, and I'm hoping to take more trainers there in the autumn.
So I'm kind of interested in the empathy part of it. So did you feel like things were moving, like you were kind of conveying something about empathy and the nature of empathy, and were you building a culture of empathy in Moscow? And
I hope so, and it's very needed because. Russia had a long period of communism, and that was followed by very rapid introduction of capitalism and quite a sort of raw style of capitalism, perhaps. So there's a lot of kind of top-down way of working, directive and so on. And we were expecting to discover the alternatives to empathy, like advice, storytelling, this kind of thing. We actually found that we didn't need to do any of that because there was simply often people were having a refusal that anyone would listen to them.
A refusal, you meaning people didn't expect anyone to listen to them?
Or if they tried to get listened to, the answer would be no. So we didn't go into the kind of detail that we would about the sort of unhappy experiences of empathy. It was just a simple yes or no, are they listening? And in most cases it was no. So we were starting right from, the value of listening. But people rapidly, so people really enjoyed that and rapidly got into empathic listening from the nonviolent communication perspective. So that was really rewarding. Yeah.
Well,
Next question.
I'd actually been to Russia. Actually, it was still the Soviet Union when I went there. It was around 1991. So, and I lived there for maybe about 4 months in Moscow.
Was it the Soviet Union in 91?
Was it, or had it just fallen apart at that time? Maybe it had already kind of fallen apart there. Yeah.
It must have been around that time. Was Yeltsin in charge?
I'm not even sure who
Uh-huh.
Yeah, was it before? No, it must have been
Or
after. Yeah.
Gorbachev.
Oh, it
If it
was.
was
Yeah.
if it was still Gorbachev, then it was the Soviet Union. If it was Yeltsin, then it was Russia by then, the Russian
Oh, okay.
Federation.
I'm not even sure who was. It's funny. Don't even remember who was in charge. But so yeah, it was. It's a very. It's coming out of a really long authoritarian history.
Mm.
So, and I would see that as kind of like the opposite of empathy, where an authoritarian system, everyone's afraid. They're closed
Mm.
off.
Mm.
They're and it seemed to be this transition. How do you go from kind of that extreme to kind of more of a empathic society, where people listen to each other, where there's like less fear. Um,
Mm. Mm.
so
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. And they did like the puppets which we use in nonviolent communication. They seem to enjoy those a lot, which was very nice because I use them quite a lot. And they kept saying, "We want the puppets."
they want the puppets. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I have your uh, your page here up of your Facebook page, and there's some
Hmm.
photos there of.
Yep. Yep. There's more to
So
come.
I see you sitting on someone's lap.
Yes, that was one of my team, and he says that's with his arms and mine. It's a Hindu training god.
Oh, uh-huh.
So it was getting a bit boring having the photographs taken, so we kind of horsed around a bit.
Uh-huh. So
Mm.
what was it that was so meaningful for you there? It's like you're like
Thank
really
you.
excited.
Well, yes, I mean, for a start, it was kind of big. The attendance was great. We had 3 evening talks, and there were about 300 people for
Wow.
each of those. And we had really good participation in the workshops. Obviously, smaller numbers, but because they were in even locally they were quite expensive, and Moscow is already an expensive city. But I just think there's really huge potential, and so both. In fact, I think all three of us want to go back again, and it's like figuring out when and what themes we're going to follow. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for nonviolent communication, for empathy, um, for all kinds of workshops. I think people have a fear that Moscow isn't safe or so on. It's probably safer than London or New York at the moment. It's like I could have walked anywhere I wanted to at night without any concerns. The metro is very clean and a little bit difficult to navigate, but you can get the hang of it. There's kind of different color lines and so on. Um, and there's just a lot of human energy. People are really interested, and they want to do a lot. So you've got to deliver as a trainer if you go to Moscow. That you can't sort of tell a long story or they want to learn and practice. And so we discovered that pair work is a very important and useful way to use time because it gets around the problem of waiting for an interpreter to finish interpreting, which
Oh
slows
yeah.
things down.
Hmm.
Whereas pair work exercises are great in that both people can talk and at normal speed and then can report back. And reporting back can be simultaneously translated so that you don't lose time in the way that you do with role plays and other things.
Were you actually talking about empathy? Did you use the word empathy? Talk about empathy is
Yeah,
important. This is how you do empathy,
yeah,
and I don't even
yeah.
know what the Russian word for empathy is. If they just took
Well,
over the
it's a
English.
similar word,
Uh-huh.
but they quite a lot of them have had training in active listening,
Mm,
which is from the tradition started by Thomas Gordon,
hmm.
and that's slightly different from empathic listening as Marshall Rosenberg describes it. I think there's probably more emphasis on feelings, and some of the workshops we were doing were for managers and directors, and in the corporate sector. So feelings is like so not a habitual habitual place to be in the workplace. But we got around that instead of sort of like asking someone, "Are you afraid?" We might say, "Are you concerned?" And that's a much more acceptable way to sort of refer to an emotional state, an inner state. So we were teaching, empathic listening in the nonviolent communication style, and supplementing that with the sort of listening to or embodying your listening and speaking, not body language, which is yet another thing, reading body language, and people really got it. I think in nonviolent communication we place a strong emphasis on needs, and they were very unfamiliar with connecting with their own needs. And it was like, oh wow, I've got needs, and it's okay, and that can be a positive thing. And the other thing that was really huge was again something from nonviolent communication, accurate appreciation. Now that sounds a bit technical, but there's the Russian culture, say like rocket science. Being very accurate and critical is vital, because otherwise, your rocket explodes. But that same kind of critical approach is not very helpful in human relationships, where appreciation is much more nourishing. And I wanted to separate appreciation from praise, because if you tell a Russian, "Oh, I think you're wonderful," and we tried that, their immediate feeling is suspicion. Why is he? And that applies in other cultures as well. But so we taught the NVC approach to appreciation, where you tell the person exactly what they did that you really enjoyed, and the impact it had on you. And it seems that information about your inner state makes it much more enjoyable to hear the appreciation for the other person. It certainly seemed to work, and I think that is an important thing to share in Moscow. It's a city because I think they're most critical of each other, at least aloud. They may have been critical of us silently, but we didn't get to hear that much. But they're very critical of each other, and as I say, that can sometimes be useful, but other times it can be a real downer. And there's a lot to praise and appreciate. So that was a big piece, and we've realized that we want to.
Oh no, it's just that I've seen that kind of cynicism within. I mean, in Russia, sometimes with Russians or kind of Eastern Europeans, there's a certain kind of edge to the dialogue, and sometimes I feel maybe that's this kind of a cultural thing.
Yeah, I think, that's a criticism they would acknowledge, probably. Yeah. So, but switching to praise wouldn't help, whereas accurate appreciation does. So does that fit into empathy?
I think
it
so.
Is part of a culture of empathy. Yeah.
I think it's the empathy is that the more we can share about ourselves, I mean, it kind of opens the door for deepening the empathic connection. So it's like, this is what's kind of going on for me. It's kind of like that self-empathy. And then it creates, I find, for example, when I interview people and I say, well, tell me a story about how empathy or whatever, or your values, how it became important to you. And they can't think about the value, the story. And I'll say, well, let me tell you a story that I have. And then I tell the story, and that's like opens a door for them to share kind of their story. And they say, oh, now I can think of something. So by saying, oh, this is what you're kind of doing for me. This is how your actions are affecting me in a positive way. It kind of like opens the door for deepening the connection.
Yeah, so it contributes to the friendship as well.
Yeah,
I imagine.
Yeah, to the friendship or to the. I see it as more the connection. That there's within NVC you can kind of do kind of this reflection, reflecting, or you can say what the needs are. But then there's also the sharing from yourself. It also helps create that empathic, deepen that empathic connection.
My partner Dorota was saying how well you did it in the last video we made together,
What was that?
the empathic reflecting.
Oh, okay.
To me, she said, "Oh, Edwin was doing that really well." So, it, although what you just said, it made me think of something Mickey Kashtan says again about workplace empathy and or nonviolent communication in the workplace. That you need to pitch your empathic invitations to the right level. If you assume that you've got permission to do anything, and then you do some empathic guessing or receiving, and the other person ends up in a puddle on the floor, sort of really connected to their deepest sorrow and their longing, that may be much more than they were expecting at work.
Oh,
So that she has a general policy of either asking, I think. I don't want to. I'm not quoting her directly, but the impression is that she might either ask or she would go for the minimum empathic connection that's consistent with the task or the agreement that's already in place.
yeah.
And that helps safety, I think.
Well, I know my partner worked in a kind of a hospital situation, and it's very stressful. Can be very hierarchical, and be domineering people, and I mean, she's always talking about people. It's like people going to their office and being in tears, right, because of the way they've been treated or the stresses and that kind of stuff. So what's kind of appropriate is kind of a
that's
question.
Different kind of tears there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I hear what you're saying. It's like you want to kind of match the situation, so you don't want to take people if they're in a work situation and bring up their deepest, fears or whatever, and kind of take them to a place where it's kind of not appropriate, maybe in the social structure. If I'm hearing that right.
Yeah. I have got one story to share with you.
Okay, great.
I hope this will work nicely on video. My sound recordist, because we were recording, was following and listening to the workshop. It was a 3-day workshop, and this was the first day. And she came to me in I think the break in the afternoon, saying that she'd been listening to what we were doing and with the nonviolent communication, and she had this friend and and I just did one empathic guess, something like, well, this is a really important friend to her, and that kind of brought tears to her eyes just there, and I thought, well, this is just the coffee break. I really want to spend more time with you. So later, after the end of the workshop, I did have some one-to-one time with her and the interpreter. And I speak some Russian, so I could follow directly what she was saying. So I was able to kind of listen, looking into her eyes, and so on. And I listened and kind of made some suggestions about how she could listen to this friend who was also very sick and who she was very worried about. And I was a little bit worried that I had sort of come in with these suggestions before listening empathically long enough. But I did the best I could at the end of a day of workshop. In fact, at the end of 10 days of workshops. And but anyway, what I didn't know was that she would go and see him that very evening. And the next day she came back, and she said, "Well, I just had to share with him how important and precious our friendship was from my heart. I couldn't listen to him straight away. I think that was one of my suggestions, was to do the listening first. But I just had to tell him." And he got it, and then he started to talk, and he hasn't been talking to me for so long. It was so wonderful, and and it was so sweet for me, Ray, to get this feedback the very next day of how empathic listening can transform a relationship that's got stuck because of something, an illness or perceived judgments or non-acceptance. So we talked a lot about the importance of accepting, and she went away and just did it, and it worked. It was like, and I had no idea. I'm glad she didn't tell me, because I might have been much more guarded if she had said she was going to go and do it that very night. So that was lovely. That's in Moscow, and I guess the younger people in Moscow. I mean, by younger I mean under 30, under 40. I think there are some very interesting and energetic and inspiring generations coming up, and in alliance with the 50 and 60-year-old generation. I think we could see something special happening in Moscow in the next 10 years. In fact, I think it's already started, but it's just not visible yet.
Well, it sounds like you wanting to do more there. It's like this. Is this
Absolutely.
this is the first time you've been there, or?
Well, no, I also went in the old days, and I've studied Russian, and I've got a lot of vocabulary. And being half Slovak, I kind of have some insights into the culture as well. So yes, I'm very keen to go back. I've got myself a Russian keyboard, and for typing, and because I thought better to buy it over there and bring it with me. So yeah, really excited.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.